Hello everyone, this is ALX and welcome to another build for today. In this video, I will continue diving into plastic modeling, bringing some new materials into the table for this very small set that I bought of the iconic X-Wing Starfighter. So my main intention is to move forward trying these new materials and techniques, like gluing or doing some more painting, although I might come short in those regards. See, I noticed late that this Bandai kit does not require any glue either. Again, it's the type that just snaps together like my previous Gundam build. And upon opening the box, I quickly realized there wouldn't be much need for paint either, outside of once again just adding some small details. For one, the plastic already comes in a proper light gray color, and secondly, the kit comes with a sheet of stickers for the color applications and the canopy detail, which I figure it's also a good opportunity to try out something new like adding some stickers. I find it funny how this set is so simple that they don't even bother to include a set of proper instructions. They're simply printed on the inside of the box. So I get the contents out of the plastic bag, and inside I find a set of runners for the X-Wing in gray, a black set for the stand, and the sticker sheet you already saw. Unfortunately, after a closer inspection, I discovered that one of the more delicate pieces came broken. So in the end, I guess I'll get to use that glue I got after all. Alright, so like my last build, the first order of the day is to clean out these pieces. A simple step to remove any possible remnants in the plastic left from the manufacturing process using just some basic soap and water. I go about being rather delicate with the scrubbing here, seeing that I already have a fragile piece broken before I even start. I finish rinsing off the runners and lay them out to dry. So once again, I decide to start the kit by warming up with a more secondary build like the stand. In this case, I do require nippers to remove the pieces, so I'm pushed to have a second go with the tool. I quickly finish it off by chipping away and sanding off the nub marks before putting it all together. Alright, time to move on to the good stuff, starting off with the ship's wing sub-assemblies. Right around this point is where I begin to feel a much more confident and comfortable handle with the nippers. I guess I only needed some more practice with the tool. And after getting all of my pieces out for wing A, I proceed to clean them up with my knife and sanding file. Again, there is no glue needed for this model, so all I have to do is push and snap the pieces together. I follow up with a wing B sub-assembly right after, pretty much repeating the same thing as the other as they are practically identical elements. I take care of some last few pieces for the wing and proceed to prep them for assembly. And with both of my wing elements completed, which I think are looking really nice, I'm ready to jump to the next step, which means it's turn for the fuselage that holds and sandwiches the wing assembly in place, and later finish the whole assembly by adding the laser cannons. So I bring out the last pair of runners and go back to the same drill as before, with the nipping, chipping away and sanding. But when I get to pull out the fragile laser cannon pieces from the sprues, I go about just a little different. Since I want to avoid stressing the pieces any more than it's needed while nipping, I start to break apart the runner in order to loosen off the rigid frame. I then do the cuts to remove the piece far from the actual connection. And cutting off the excess plastic after comes pretty easy and safely now. I work on that last round of sanding and removing nub marks from that final batch, and in order to have all the pieces ready, I just need to fix that broken laser cannon. I will be using one of the most common plastic cements, which is Tamiya's extra thin cement. Unlike glue, this thing basically dissolves and welds plastic together, but it also takes some time to harden and solidify the connection. For that reason, I made this holder with some upside down masking tape to hold the piece in place while I add the cement. Now the way this works is you add a small amount outside the actual joint and then let it flow into it. And as it hardens, I go on and add some more cement to really penetrate into that new connection. I leave the piece upright to keep it from leaning or dropping to one or either side. And after some time, this piece is feeling pretty solid. Now before I jump into finishing the assembly, I first want to work on adding some paint applications to the model, place the stickers and add a few other details. Once again, I'll be using my Tamiya set of paints and materials, but because I'll start experimenting with my markers from this kit for some basic detailing and weathering, I first want to make some tests using some spare runners and a plastic spoon. I begin by preparing two of the main colors I'll be using in order to paint some of these plastic leftovers. I add a good number of coats to the runners, especially along the molded text where I have the most texture for weathering. I also paint the spoon for my first test, which simply consists on seeing whether painting above with another color affects the coats below, resulting in blending issues. Happily, I can easily do paint overs with these Tamiya paints as they don't blend at all once they are dry, apart from my terrible brushing which has no excuse. As for the sprues, I will experiment doing some weathering using my Gundam marker and eraser. First, I want to overload all the creases with ink. This way, I can come about with the eraser fluid and smudge the ink around in order to create that weathering effect. My only concern is how the paint reacts to the eraser fluid as it's also a solvent. And the answer is, it does end up removing and contaminating with a slight amount of paint. As long as I'm gentle with those painted sections, I should be able to pull it off. And as for the effect, I think it looks convincing enough. Next, I'll quickly try out this Gundam silver marker, XGM02, that I found could be useful for a very specific detail on this model. You might know what or who am I talking about. Overall, I really like the silver finish from this particular marker, as it gives a pretty convincing silver effect. So one very last thing I want to test is how the weathering affects the stickers, as I will be applying quite a few of them on this kit. Taking a sample from the sticker sheet, I apply some of them onto the sprues and go about working out the weathering with the markers. At the end, not only do the stickers are unaffected by the method, but they allow the ink to smudge and hold the effect pretty well. Alright, I think that was just about enough testing at this point, so it's time to move on to do some proper painting. This time, I'm adding a new base color to my palette, a flat blue for a very particular detail just like the silver marker. And thankfully, I'm upgrading to this proper modeling brush that I also got from Tamiya. You can see just how much of an upgrade there is comparing the new tip to my old brush. Now, stickers on this kit provide a good amount of color applications, but outside of that, I think my two tones of gray are enough to complement the rest of the details. Starting with the light gray details, I messed up recording my first brush strokes, but in any case, you can see my painting skills are still lacking. I'm having to add an extra cleanup step just to really tidy up each painted detail. I keep on with adding a couple more coats and continue coloring and cleaning up various other panel details throughout the ship. And as I add some small light gray applications on the back of these laser cannons, I should mention that I'm using reference from a high-end model I found online as my color guide. I'll be adding the link in my description if it helps anybody. Changing over to the darker gray, I use this one on the engines to paint the exhaust details as well as some other less visible sections. I make sure to paint thoroughly and go heavy on the coats so the paint can endure some future weathering. Moving on to the back of the ship, this area receives a full coverage of dark gray. And after some quick cleanup that has it looking great, I continue to the last, much more complex color application around the canopy area. With some patience, dealing with a few rounds of cleaning and detailing on this section is not the best work, but I'm happy with the result. Speaking about the canopy, the kit provides an entire sticker to cover this piece, but I'm afraid that if I end up using it, I might lose some of that detail in the plastic, so I decided to paint the piece and then add the black window sections later. One small issue though is that I don't have a matching tone for this color. Fortunately, using the only two base colors that I have, I'm able to achieve a mix that comes close enough to that greenish blue tone of gray. After painting and letting the piece dry, I feel the result is not that far off from the original. And with the canopy all said and done, that leaves me with no more painting left to do, which means it's time to move on to the stickers. And number one belongs to the canopy. And like I said before, I will only be using the black windows, meaning I have to very carefully cut out each individual window. It's a tedious and very delicate job, but the stickers were fortunately very forgiving and easy to work with. After that particular case, I continue normally with the rest of the stickers. Like I said, they were generally quite easy to adjust and fix in place. I was also surprised that they were soft enough to be pushed and tightened around the plastic beneath, making the details come through. This will be very helpful when adding panel lining and weathering later. This piece of fuselage is now looking very colorful and alive. And once I add the canopy piece, it all starts to really come together. And that just leaves me with the wing assemblies and the laser cannons to cover. This model is feeling very close to being complete at this point, but doing a quick checkup with my reference, I go back to adding some more paint applications on the wings. Some of them are less visible, while in other cases it's about adding more depth, like the insides of the turbines. Once I'm feeling happy with all that painting and coloring, I pick up my Gundam markers to start working on those final steps. Once again, taking from my previous experience and just by looking at the reference material, my goal is to achieve a messy look. So I ink around pretty freely, leaving spare ink to spread around later. I come back with the eraser marker using the fluid on my cotton swab to smudge and shape the ink into weathering and damage patterns. On this top fuselage piece, I filled up certain areas with ink, while in others, I had all the applied stickers. I was afraid I'd lose some panel detail because of them, but at the end, they weren't a big issue, letting a good amount of ink fall into the paneling. Retouching and smudging with reference at hand is how I slowly achieved the dirty and weathered look. Doing this treatment all the way to the laser cannons, you can see just what a difference does it make in this quick comparison. I finished up by darkening and detailing certain harder to reach areas, and after going over a not so small pile of cotton swabs, the weathering is pretty much done. Just when I thought I was practically done, I discovered I made a slight mistake when applying the stickers to the laser cannons. I assumed they were all the same with the same connections to the wings, but there is more than one pattern of attachment for them. I did not want to risk trying to peel off and damaging the stickers, so that left me with modifying and downright removing some of the pegs to be able to apply the cannons interchangeably from one another. And to finish off working on these wings, I decided to add some last bit of weathering on the exhausts for good measure. I feel they are a little bit too clean, so by doing some delicate sanding with my files, I tried to show some level of deterioration. Even though I feel they ended up looking somewhat overdone, I think it looks better than having them left pristine. As for the last but definitely not least touch of detail in this model is the galaxy's most famous astromech. For this type of details, I thought it would be easier and more useful to get a silver marker, and for future builds as well. Finally, it's not hard to with a distinct touch of blue. I got the color originally just for this minuscule detail. Although looking at the canopy I painted, it showed it's helpful to have a set of primary colors at hand anyways. And I admit the result was a very wonky R2-D2, but it is so small that from a distance, I think it generally does a trick. Okay, so it's now time to truly put all this together. It really only takes me a couple of minutes since the assembly is pretty straightforward. Kinda reminds me of those Kinder Egg toys. I came back with my markers one last time to do some inking and weathering around the seams in an effort to hide them. I also accidentally knocked the previously broken laser cannon piece during these last steps, but was able to fix it up in no time. Alright, so there you go. Just one final good look at the finished model. I really feel so happy with this result. The build as per the instructions was particularly simple and straightforward, but giving it that extra attention to detail using a few tools and materials, I think it really transformed the final result. I'm surprised by how well the Gundam markers performed for recreating the weathering and other wear and damage details. The extra touches of grey added a little bit more contrast to the base color of the plastic. And of course, adding that little touch of R2, I think it helped to bring a little bit more life into the set. Overall, it was a great learning experience with a very nice looking model at the end. For now, I think I'm done with these very basic kits. So my next build, I'll make sure that I look for something more involved that requires more steps and techniques. Probably anything outside of Bandai. So thank you very much for watching, I hope you all enjoyed this build and see you all next time. Goodbye!